we're going to keyframe our displacement. Go back to the start of the comp, and we're going to hit U to bring up our keyframes, and we're going to set 2 more keyframes. Now at the end of this effect, we want to go ahead and drop those keyframes. So as he comes through the wall, we want to keep this at our -35 all the way to about here. So set 2 more keyframes and go to our last 2 keyframes and set everything back to 0. And this will get rid of our wandering displacement here. Now the last thing that we need to do is we need to give him a drop shadow. Because he's coming through the wall like this, he needs to have a shadow. And what we're going to do is we're going to set that shadow to start right here as he is starting to clear the wall. So what we're going to do is we're going to go collapse all this so that we can actually follow along, easily see what we're doing. And we're going to right click in our pre-keyed footage. We're going to go up here and we're going to go in and I never can remember where this effect is at, so drop shadow. Perspective, okay. And drag this over. And the drop shadow needs to affect this footage in a very specific way. As of this moment, we have nothing really happening, and that's because the way that our footage is set up. If we bring up shadow only, you'll notice the shadow's clinging pretty tight to him, and we don't want that. So what we want to do is we want him to have a very tight and sharp shadow as he's right up against the wall, and as he starts to move, he's going to step away, so the shadow's going to need to feather out and get less opaque. So we want to start the shadow right at the end of our effect here. And we're going to go ahead and set our softness to 5 and keyframe it, our distance to 0, and our opacity to 0. And then we move forward 1 frame, and we're going to go ahead and push out the shadow a little bit. So we're going to set the opacity to 35, set the distance to about 18.5, so it's behind him now, and we're going to leave the softness at about 5 for the moment. And as he steps forward, we want the shadow to get further away from him, so we're going to move into this step where he makes that first step. We want the shadow's distance to become greater. Now, when I shot this footage, I actually shot him with him close enough to the green screen that I was able to actually kind of see what he was doing. And we're going to push the softness up to about 12.5 so I could see where his shadow was at compared to where he was relatively. So as he steps away, we want the shadow to kind of get further away from him, but we also want the shadow to soften up. So we're going to go ahead and bring up a keyframe so we can see where we're at here. And we want to soften the shadow up too and drop the opacity to about 25%. So as he steps out, that shadow is going to pull back. Now we don't want the shadow to move with him quite that much, so we want to pull the shadow back a little bit further. And we're going to adjust the direction so it's about halfway up along his head. So as he steps out, that shadow is going to get softer. And let's go ahead and fit our footage to here, and we're going to give it a quick RAM preview starting at the start here. Now I don't like how it's kind of leaning forward with this step, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to that second step right here, and we're going to push the distance out just a little bit more, so that between here and here the shadow needs to maintain pretty close to the same spot on the wall. And we're going to feather it all the way out. Once we here, we want to feather it out to about, let's see, if we feather it out a little bit more, right in there, about 65. But we want it to start here, so we want to go ahead and bring that out to 65 here. That way, once he makes that big step away from the wall, that shadow really feathers out. And I think that looks really good. So we're going to go ahead and RAM preview that one last time. Now, the last thing to do before we get into the last few pieces here is we need to take all of this and color grade it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to our project window, we're going to right click new composition, and it needs to be the same length as our comp. So let's go ahead and click, control click, and we have 133 frames total. So we're going to go ahead and right click, new composition, 133 frames, excuse me. Make sure that everything is set together, and it's 1440 by 1080, and everything's good. And we're going to go ahead and name this final comp. I'm going to grab that main comp and drag it in and drop it in here. So we want to add a new adjustment layer. And one of the other pieces of software we're using for color grading is going to be Magic Bullet Mojo. You can get, once again, from Red Giant Software. They have a bunch of things here, and you can grab their trial and download it and try and follow along. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a color correction curves. And we want to beef up the contrast just a little bit with a gentle S-curve. I mean, very gentle. We don't want to go really overboard with this. Otherwise you start to get blown out a little bit. So it's just very subtle, so that as we get in here, we've got a pretty good contrasting look here. Everything looks pretty good. Now, I'm going to right click, go down to Magic Bullet Mojo, and Mojo's a really good all around kind of color correction suite. I like it. It's a lot of fun. And the only changes we're going to really make to this right now is I'm going to go ahead and up the bleach it to 20. I'm going to jump ahead so you can see the skin here. And this is this thing where you can do skin overlay. And what it does is it puts a grid over our skin tones, so you see which, make sure that they're in proper range. I'm going to back this to -19, which puts us a little more red than I want. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of adjust this just a little bit so that we're more in range with what we want here. So take this down, take this up a little bit. But yeah, we can sit here and scrub through and find a good range where we have our skin where it needs to be. Actually, it looks like 8 is going to be our magic number for this. And we bring our skin solo up to about 25%. What that does is it starts to bleach the color out of the rest of our footage. This is looking pretty good. And the last thing I added was a tint. So we're going to right click, color correction, tint, and we're only going to tint it about 40%. So we've taken out a big chunk of color, but if we go back to our glow effect, it really still kind of, you know, shows right on through. Now the last thing that we have to do is I set everything up for letterboxing. I like letterboxing. I love the way it looks. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some letterboxing. Now I'm aiming for a 2-3-5 look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a transition linear wipe. I'm going to go ahead and add 2 of these. I'm going to set one's angle to 0 and one's angle to 180. And because this is 4:3 footage at 1.33 and we're shooting for 2.35, I'm going to give it a 12.5% wipe on top and bottom, so that eats up about 25% of my frame. Now we can take our main comp and we're going to bump it down just a little bit so we have a little bit more headroom for our actors, and kind of scrub back through. And we're looking a little dark here, so I'm going to go ahead and take my curves and kind of up them just a little bit. There we go. This puts us right where we want to be with our footage. And all that's left for us to do is a quick RAM preview to take a look at the effect and see how everything looks before we render it out. So here we go. And everything looks pretty dang good. I hope you guys have enjoyed this tutorial, and if you have, leave me comments. If you didn't, leave me some comments. If you have any advice, tips, or anything you think I might have been able to do different to kind of clean up the effect or change things that you think might make it better, leave me a comment and let me know. I hope you guys have enjoyed this and learned a little something. You guys have fun. This is Keith for 80 Tuts Plus.